is Pat Sauer with the Iowa Stormwater Education Partnership, and I am here with Tom Rosberg from Drake University. And Tom, where are we today and what are we looking at?
Well, we are in Doolittle Prairie, one of the best state preserves in central Iowa, looking at Wet Music Prairie. We're looking at late spring, early summer flowers today. Okay, let's get started here today at Doolittle Prairie. We have lots of things in bloom, so we got a lot of things to see. We'll start with this Golden Alexander here. There's a lot of that out here. Golden Alexander is a wet music prairie species. It's pretty easy to get established from seed, so if you want to do a reconstruction, be sure to include some seed of this species and you'll have some blooming Golden Alexander pretty quickly. Let's pull up a shoot here, a stem, take a closer look. This one's pretty easy because the flowers are so small. Tiny yellow flowers here. You really can't make out really any of the flower parts unless you look at it with a hand lens. But what's really unique and distinctive about Golden Alexander or any other plants in the parsley family is the way the flowers are arranged. You can see that there's these branches here that all come from a common point. This is called an umbel. All these branches come from a common point. If we take one of these branches and we look really closely at it, it's kind of hard to see, but there's really small branches or pedicels for each of these flowers. So there's another really tiny umbel, and all of those again come from the same point, attached at the same point. And so there's really two umbels set together in this larger flower here. That's why it's called a compound umbel. And these compound umbels are characteristic of many of the species in the parsley family. So again, you'd recognize this one on the basis of those really small yellow flowers, those compound umbels. The leaves are fairly divided into numerous leaflets. The wind's kind of making it hard to see this here, but here's a lower leaf here with separate leaflets. And all of the Apiaceae, or again parsley family species, tend to have some sheathing, this reddish coloration right here, some sheathing that attaches the leaves to the stem. So again, here's an entire leaf here. It comes down to the base of the leaf where the leaf attaches, and there's this reddish sheathing, kind of just tissue that kind of wraps around the base of that stem. Golden Alexander, or Zizia aurea. All right, well, let's stay with yellow since we're looking at yellow, and then there's another yellow another yellow species here, flowering species that's really small. I'll see if we can find maybe a group that can come in and show you what it looks like right down here, growing amongst the grasses and only about 6 inches tall. Let me grab one of these. It's a dainty little plant. I'll see if I can get one here in its entirety. Here we go. So it's got some substantial leaves, but they look like grass leaves, hence the name yellow stargrass. This is yellow stargrass. The yellow flowers that have 6, we call these tepals because 3 of them are petals and 3 of them are sepals, but they all look alike. So the term for that is tepals. Has these 6 tepals. That kind of makes it look like a star. And then again, the grass-like leaves, yellow stargrass. An easy one to identify once you've learned it. It's again a fairly common species in wet music prairie, somewhat wetter ground. It can be seen on somewhat dry prairies too. So it's not really a grass. One clue is that grasses never have flowers that are this big and showy. Again, it's called grass just because of the grass-like leaves. Yellow star grass used to be in the lily family, but now it's in the daffodil family, the Amaryllidaceae. And the flowers will be finishing up here and making some little capsules with some seeds in them. And then all you'll have is just the fruits. And then at that time it gets pretty hard to find it and see it, because again, you can kind of imagine it's going to blend in really well with other grasses in here and kind of be hard to find. The flowers have yellow on one side of these tepals, and they're more greenish on the other side. It's kind of unusual because most of the time petals are the same color on both sides. So when this is closed up, and it will close up when it's not nice and sunny, then the flower looks more greenish. When it's opened up like this, you're seeing the top side of the tepals, and they're nice bright yellow. Each tepal has a single little stamen at the base of it there, so there's 6 stamens. I think this plant and many of the plants in the Amaryllidaceae have some toxicity, so I'm sure you wouldn't want to be munching on any of the leaves on this species. All right, well, just let that go back down there, and let's see if we can find another kind of yellowish or orangish one right here, right next to where we were here, not very far away. So here's a few shoots of Hoary Puccoon. So Hoary Puccoon is in the Boraginaceae family, or the borage family. Let's take a branch here off of this so we can kind of separate it and see things maybe a little bit closer here. The flowers are 5 petals. They're fused at the base. Fused at the base, so there's a what's called a corolla tube. There you can kind of see the corolla tube, and then as that tube reaches the height there, then the petals are no longer fused, and we can see the separate ends of those petals. We call those the corolla lobes. There's 5 petals there, so this fused, fairly slender tube, orange color. The flowers are, let me grab another one here, because this is pretty characteristic for, again, species in this family. You can kind of see how the flowers are all coming off one side of this stem right here. In fact, one way of describing this is this, as the flowers open up, it's kind of like a scorpion tail that's unfolding. Then the flowers are all on one side to start with. As this completely unfolds or uncurls, then the flowers will kind of reposition themselves so they're not so much all on one side. But that initial unfolding or uncurling of the inflorescence is something that's pretty common for species in this family. Also, the Hoary Puccoon, is the name Hoary comes from the leaves, which have a lot of pubescence on them. Might be able to see a little bit of that, or the kind of at least a grayish silvery coloration on these leaves. Hoary Puccoon is one of 3 species of puccoon that you might run into, and they kind of represent what you often see with many species. Different species of the same genus occupy different environments. So this one, Hoary Puccoon, is a good one for these mesic prairies, wet mesic prairies. If we were on a really dry site that had thinner soils and much less moisture, we would possibly find a species called fringed puccoon that has more yellow flowers, but would look very similar to this. And then if we were on a really sandy prairie, there's one that's called sand puccoon. So all of the puccoons, again, are going to have some similarities in the shape of the flower. Differences would be in maybe the color of the petals, or the size and shape of the leaves, and the amount of hairiness that we see. All right, we're going to take a look at some prairie phlox next. There's quite a bit of it out here scattered around. There's actually two color forms of it here. This one right here is the white version of prairie phlox. Let me separate it from the sedges and grasses there a little bit. So we saw some woodland phlox in the forest a few weeks ago. This is a relative, of course, so you should be able to see some similarities. Again, the phlox has a flower that has 5 petals, and like the puccoons we were just looking at, petals are fused, and they have a really long, slender tube. The phlox have a even longer and more slender corolla tube right here than what the hoary puccoon had. So that's a real distinctive mark of all of the phloxes, to have that really long, slender tube that is formed by the fusion of those 5 petals. The flowers are just kind of arranged up here in a cluster. The phloxes have 2 opposite leaves along the stems, little pairs of opposite leaves. The prairie phlox has leaves that are much more slender and narrow than the woodland phlox. This is kind of an adaptation for prairie plants to common thing that prairie plants do, reduce the size of their leaves somewhat relative to, again, maybe a similar species that is in a more friendly environment. Prairies tend to be more drying out with the strong sunshine, lots of wind, and so to help conserve moisture, smaller leaves or leaflets is a common way that prairie plants do that. So again, this is kind of a, well, it's not completely white, kind of a really, really light colored lavender color perhaps there. You can see just a tiny tinge of lavender maybe in it. The other common color version is strongly pink. The same species right over here, and I would say that this version here is probably what we often see the most, but Doolittle Prairie has both of these color forms out here in about equal amounts. All right, that's again prairie phlox. All right, we have, oh, there we go. Yeah. So here is a ragwort. Separate things out here a little bit. So here's a plant that common name is ragwort. All right, we're going to take a look at some other plants here that are not flowering yet, and show you how to identify some things vegetatively. Some of these are very easy to learn. Probably the easiest is the compass plant right here. So this is a young growth of compass plant coming up. Here's another basal leaf here. These are 2 basal leaves. The compass plant, if it is old enough plant and it's going to flower, then it will also produce an upright stem that will have leaves on it too. But if it may just produce these basal leaves. There's 3 of them right here. Compass plant has leaves that are really deeply lobed, as you can see here. This is called lobing, when the leaves are cut out like this and have these segments to them. Deeply lobed. Of course, it gets its name by the tendency for these leaves, not quite yet because these are too young probably, but as the plant gets, as these leaves get larger and it gets some more leaves, the tendency for most of these leaves to be held in a fashion where the face, the flat portions of the leaves, kind of face to the east and west, and the lobes face north and south. So we call that leaf orientation. There is a purpose there. The compass plant is, again, using this as a way to minimize the amount of water loss and to kind of maximize opportunity for photosynthesis. If you think about where the sun is at during the hottest part of the day, it's right overhead. And in Iowa, it's slightly off into the southern portion of the sky, but high in the sky and a little bit to the south. And so by having the leaves, first of all, oriented this way, vertically, there's not as much direct solar radiation hitting the leaf surfaces. It's hitting the edges of the leaves. When the sun is lower in the sky, and especially in the morning when the sun comes up, that's a much better time for plants to be doing photosynthesis because it's a lot cooler, there's more relative humidity in the air, there's not as much moisture loss as the plant has the stomata, the pores on these leaves open to gain carbon dioxide. Anytime that's happening, anytime carbon dioxide is coming in for photosynthesis, water is coming out, water vapor is coming out. So they want to minimize that loss of water vapor. So by kind of being focused on photosynthesis early in the morning, in the first maybe 2 to 3 hours after sunrise, again, that being a very good time of the day for photosynthesis to happen, having one side of your leaf face towards the east is a good idea. So that's what Compass Plant is trying to do. It's trying to gain an advantage in photosynthesis and not lose as much moisture. Another one right here next to us that's again very easy to identify vegetatively is this one right here. This is Rattlesnake Master. It has uncharacteristic leaves for a plant that's for a species that's in the family it's in. It has these lily-like leaves, you might say, or large grass-like leaves, parallel venation. It looks like yucca. The leaves look like yucca. That's why it gets its scientific name, Eryngium yuccifolium. The yuccifolium means leaves like yucca. So one thing that you can see just to help you be sure you're looking at Rattlesnake Master, though, is to take a closer look at these leaves and look for these little tiny bristles that are coming off the margin of the leaf. They're really small. Maybe this one you can see here. There's one there. There's one there. Tiny little bristles that come off every so often along the edge of the leaf. All right, Rattlesnake Master. Very easy one to learn. All right, what else do we have down in here? We have some gentians. A cluster of stems coming up here. That's a gentian. And I can recognize it as a gentian because of the very smooth stems, the opposite leaves. There you go, the leaves are opposite, two leaves, opposite each other. There's no leaf stem here. Kind of shiny looking too. That's another nice characteristic of gentians. So there's two gentians that could be out here in either bottle gentian or yellow gentian, cream gentian. This one looks like it's probably bottle gentian, but it's kind of hard to say for sure right now when the growth is so small and just getting started. But I think that's probably what it is, bottle gentian. Over here, just a little ways away, we have a thistle, a native thistle. And this one really shows a nice characteristic that helps us separate native thistles from non-native thistles, and that's the undersurface of the leaf here. This is the top, this is the bottom. It's just really very white, flush with white little short hairs, dense little hairs on the bottom side of this leaf. All of the native thistles have this characteristic that will help again separate them from at least some, maybe not all, but at least some of the non-native ones. And that's kind of important when you're trying to manage a prairie. You don't want the non-native ones. You want to get rid of them, but you want to keep the native ones.
This one with the leaves that are beginning to get somewhat lobed here. In fact, these up here are even more lobed. You can see the lobing in these leaves. This is Cirsium discolor. And the way I remember that is discolor begins with a D, and these leaves are divided by these lobes. So Cirsium discolor has divided leaves. That's also it's also called field thistle. The common name is field thistle. And right next to field thistle is another native plant that we can identify here vegetatively already. Taller, a little bit more coarse. It too has opposite leaves. Its leaves have a little bit of a leaf stem though, unlike the gentians, which didn't have any stem at the base of the leaf. And this has some, well, the leaves are a little bit more coarse. There's some pubescence on them. The stem doesn't have a whole lot, but the leaves have some. This is sawtooth sunflower, just again getting started.
Now we're going to take a look at another feature of Doolittle Prairie. Out here, Doolittle Prairie sits on the Des Moines Lobe, a portion of Iowa, a landform in Iowa that was recently glaciated, and so that means that we've got a relatively young landscape. It means that there's not that much drainage already occurring on the landscape because there hasn't been time for the landscape to develop that drainage system of rivers and streams. So that's what brings into play all these potholes that are out here. We're standing on the edge of a pothole right here. I'm going to try to show you kind of the edge between the pothole, which is a wetland, and the wet Mesic Prairie, which is not a wetland. And you can kind of see it as you look over this way. The prairie is on the left, where the yellowish coloration of the golden alexanders occurs. And the wetland is on the right. The beginning of the wetland, the beginning of the pothole is on the right, where there's not as much color and there's more grasses and sedges. So about right through here, move this prairie that way and wetland that way. The wetland begins here with a sedge meadow. Sedge meadow is a type of wetland that is temporarily flooded. The flooding maybe occurs for a couple of weeks during the growing season, or maybe just saturated. There's not that much water standing on top of the surface of the soil, but there's enough water here in the soil and enough wetness and saturation to influence the plants that we see. And many sedges, probably 5 or 6 different species of sedges, are intermixed in here in this sedge meadow area. I can just pull up one here quick. This is a sedge right here, running sedge. Another species that's in here that intermixes with the sedges is a couple different grasses, and here is a really large, robust one. This is prairie cordgrass. It's a pretty stout grass. You can see the broad leaves, pretty thick stem here. So prairie cordgrass. And then there's another one that's a little bit more slender. Let's see here. I'm not seeing any of it. Well, there is some blue joint grass in here too, but it's not quite as visible right now. All right, we're moving from the edge of the wetland basin where we could distinguish the prairie, the wet Mesic Prairie, and then the sedge meadow. As we walk through the sedge meadow here, we're seeing that the water is getting deeper here, actually walking in some water now. The soil here is flooded. There's standing water above the soil surface. So we're getting into a deeper portion of the basin. is the deepest, we can see kind of a change in the vegetation about right in here. Where the sedge meadow is kind of giving way. There's some, again, sedge meadow, lots of different sedges right through here. You can see another one right here that's a different species than what we saw earlier. This is another sedge right here. And so these sedges are now giving way to a plant that has a smartweed out there, smartweed. Water smartweed is a wetland species that is common in these shallow emergent marshes, and it's a real dominant species here. You can see a lot of it through the center part of the basin. Right in the middle of the basin we see less vegetation. That would be the deepest part right there. There could be some maybe some submergent species in there. There could be some other emergent species just starting. Another species that is right here on the edge is this one. This is a species called spike rush. It's pretty distinctive because it has just these single stems and then a single little spike at the top. Spike rushes. We have traveled about 3 miles or so south of Doolittle Prairie down to Soper's Mill access. We're on the north side of the road, on the east side of the river. This is a riparian forest through here, quite a few basswoods and maples. While along the trail here, I've noticed several species that we could take a quick look at and kind of contrast a couple of similar looking species that are sometimes difficult when they're not in flower. When they're in flower, they're pretty easy. This one is false Solomon seal. So false Solomon seal and Solomon seal look very similar, except for the location of the flowers, which is a dead giveaway. So you can see a false Solomon seal here has a terminal cluster of small white flowers here, very small little white flowers in there. And Solomon seal, just a little ways back here. Again, kind of the same look overall with respect to the leaves, but the flowers here are individually attached to the location where the leaves attach. Right there and one there. So kind of just a single file row of a small cluster of flowers that droop downward underneath the plant. Solomon seal often has this curved growth habit to it, and the flowers then just dangle down on the underside of the plant. There is a good difference, a good characteristic to separate these, and I think I talked about it a week ago, or I mean not a week ago, but the last time we were out in the forest, and that is easy to see now because here again is Solomon seal, and we look at the base of these leaves. We see that the base of the leaf, try and get the light good here, right here at the tip of my little finger there, that is attached directly right to the stem. Now let's go back and look at false Solomon seal. This is in the shade a little bit more here, but I hope you can see there is a clear little bit of a leaf stem right there, a petiole. Maybe you can see it better right there. It's at least maybe 5 millimeters long or so. So there's the leaf is attached by a short little stem. Also, maybe you notice that these leaves have a lot more of a creased look to the surface here. The veins look like there's more of a crease there, kind of a folding perhaps, but very distinct kind of markings on the surface of the leaf that doesn't show up nearly as much on Solomon seal. All right, another one right next to us here is a very ubiquitous plant in many of our forests in Iowa. This one right here, this is a species of black snakeroot. The flowers are right here. That's about as good as it gets for the flowers. They're very small, little flowers. It's got leaves that are divided. Would even call that compound probably there, compound leaves. So the most common species of black snake root is what we call common black snake root. Let me see if I can make sure that's what we have here. This one looks like it's not the common black snake root, but Canada black snake root. And that I have to, in order to distinguish those, you have to look at the flower and kind of determine how many male flowers there are in this cluster up here, and look at the styles on the female flowers. All right, that's again black snake root, Canada black snake root. Right here, actually, well, this is really cool because here's another one that looks very similar to the Solomon seals, the false Solomon seal and the real Solomon seal. But look at this one. Its leaves come down and at the base here wrap completely around the stem. That's called perfoliate. Maybe I can make this a little bit easier to see. There we can see this leaf here is wrapped completely around. This is yellow bellwort. We don't have any flowers yet on this, but vegetatively, very easy to distinguish again. Similar looking leaves to the false Solomon seal and Solomon seal, but except for the base of them there, again wrapping all the way around the stem, and the stem actually going through the leaf. All right, another one right here doing very well is this plant here. So this one, let me get a portion of it here, top snatch a little bit of it here. This is called zigzag goldenrod. So this is a species that won't be flowering until late summer, but it's pretty much fully grown already. So the characteristic here, you can kind of see a little bit of a zigzag pattern in the stem. That's where it gets its name. From one node to the next node, the inner nodes are kind of zigzag back and forth a little bit. These leaves are pretty distinctive, I think, as well. They have a broad petiole or leaf attachment here. The leaf is attached here by this broad, somewhat winged petiole. Egg-shaped or elliptic leaves with a lot of teeth along the margins. All right, we're going to transition to some woody plants here. There's three here we're going to point out. And the first one here is a really important one to recognize, and because it's an invasive species. This is honeysuckle right here. There's another plant growing in here with it, so let's just pull this branch down here so we make sure we're looking at the right thing. Here we go. This one is called Max honeysuckle. There's a couple of species that are invasive in Iowa. Max honeysuckle is recognized by the leaves that have these tapering tips here. The tip of this leaf really tapers out to a really slender point. And then also the flowers, which occur in the leaf axils here. So here's a pair of leaves opposite each other, and two flowers here, two flowers here. Those flowers are on little flower stems they call pedicels. Those little flower stems are shorter than the adjacent petioles of the leaf.
So the point here is essentially that the flowers are really close down into the axil of the leaf here. The other species that we could run into that's equally as invasive and problematic is Tatarian honeysuckle. And again, its leaves would not have this tapering point that we see on some of these leaves here, like this one. It would not have that tapering point. The leaf would be more just elliptic and similar on both ends. And then also Tatarian honeysuckle has its flowers on a much longer flower stem. So these flowers would be much higher up. The flower stem would be longer than this petiole that's right next to it. So yes, this is one of the most problematic species in the Midwest in forest ecosystems. Very invasive. Here we see just a couple plants, but I've seen places where it's so thick you can barely walk through it. And the result of that is that there's very little native herbaceous layer that can grow underneath the really dense stands of it. It's a big problem. It was imported due to its ornamental qualities, and like other species has escaped and has become a big problem. Another woody plant that you should recognize anytime you head out into the forest, of course, so that you can avoid any kind of skin problems or skin rashes, is poison ivy. So here's a little short plant of poison ivy. So the saying goes, leaves of 3, let it be. Well, that's close. It should be leaflets of 3, let it be, because this is a single leaf. It's a compound leaf with 3 leaflets. Another thing about poison ivy that's easy to helps you to recognize, because there's other things that have 3 leaflets, box elder, for example. But look at this one right here. The 2 bottom leaflets have a lobe on one side here, on the other side here, that kind of makes it look like a mitten. So that mitten shape with a single thumb lobe on one side on the 2 lower leaflets is another good characteristic for poison ivy. And again, most people probably are somewhat sensitive to the chemical that poison ivy produces, urushiol. So, and sometimes again, it can be pretty severe. So be careful with it. And then we're going to take a look at one more. This one's, poison ivy is native, of course. Another native woody plant growing right here. And by the way, here's another poison ivy plant right here. You can really see those 3 leaflets there. Another one that's growing right in this area is greenbrier. So I like to point out greenbrier because it's another one that, while it's not a problem like poison ivy, it can be kind of a nasty plant if you get caught in an area and try to walk through it, because this plant doesn't show it, but the more older stems can have a lot of really sharp prickles on them, so it can be really prickly looking, and of course that can be a problem if you get kind of caught up in that. Alternate leaves, egg-shaped leaves there. All right, greenbrier.